So to recap on the story so far, and what is prevalent in the story is the unexpected when you least expect it, how everything can change in a moment, and that's for any of us on any given day. Something to change, a phone call can change your life, change your direction, someone you meet. But also, something I really try to make clear in my story on Facebook is who, how and why. Who set me up, how I was set up, and why I was set up and framed. That's something that comes out more and more in the story. And then also, this is just about the starting point of a very long, deep, dark black frame. Comes out more in the story later that what gets mixed into the black fix, and then who mixes what, just to set you up even more. And it's being in a church this morning, it's like the film The Omen, when the priest and the big spire gets struck by lightning and gets put right through his heart. There's one thing it's really become clear to me is it's not just the Prince of Darkness and the Fallen and their hybrid hosts. It's also people within churches, your Christian brothers and sisters, members of your own family, community, who sometimes want to put a big church spire right through your heart in the big disc serial killer frame. And what was interesting too, I also touched on that I was running a hostel, my Christian calling at the time, for homeless young men, and how with my neighbours in the community down that end of Victoria Road in Dis, the false allegations were never far away. There was for instance Leanne, Cara Jones used to come and see Brian and Terry. Dale had a girlfriend, Gavin had a girlfriend, Lisa, who was later she was pregnant with Katie. So there were young girls coming to the house, and also youths from Dickleborough. So 55 Victoria Road was never 25 Cromwell Street. There were no bodies buried in the garden or bricked into the walls or under the floors. People was calling me Fred West and Sutcliffe and everything else. No one was ever abused at 55 Victoria Road. It was a place where young people were supported, helped. Also with the drop-in centre forward in this, I was running with Jonathan Steggles. And the crime rate in Dickleborough, which I also touched upon, was the highest in Norfolk. As we started getting involved with the youths in Dickleborough and Simon's coaches giving me a coach and doing football matches against youths in Dis and from Palgrave, what used to be on my bus run, the crime rate in Dickleborough went down, and a lot of those youths started getting them free from drugs, alcohol. But here I am in Kenya. The situation with Jaffa and his gang has been resolved. Mum has also put off going into Uganda, which was good because this totally scuppered William's sinister little plot to overtake her ministry while she was in Uganda. He was going to sign all the paperwork and sign the ministry over to himself, but because she had delayed because I was coming in, that completely, she was able to sign the paperwork and keep the ministry under her control and not under William, who was pretty corrupt pastor. So things is so far so good, everything's turning out okay, but I still, like I say, genocide on the horizon, heavy fighting in southern Sudan, heavy fighting down the Rift Valley, northern Uganda, who are kinsmen to the tribes of northern Kenya. And now we've got to go into Uganda because Mum has got children from Rwanda and Uganda, and their paperwork is run out for them being in Kenya. So she has to go and see an advocate in Kampala to get new papers so they can remain in Kenya. So they have to come back into Uganda with us. Mum has to see the advocate in Kampala to get the paperwork so the children can continue to stay in Kenya. So on the Friday afternoon we get on a bus and go into Uganda. But this happens to just be the weekend of the Ugandan, the worst possible time to be going in Uganda. It's the time of the elections in Uganda, and also the time of all the elections in South Africa, with over 300 years of white rule and oppression, apartheid being overturned. So it's a very big weekend for Uganda. A lot of trouble is expected. All four warlords are rearing up. There are roadblocks and soldiers everywhere. And lo and behold, it's only me and my mum. I'm the only white guy on the bus. I say I'm not racial precious. I've got African nation friends, you know, Oriental friends, Turkish friends, Kurdish friends, you name it. I'm not prejudiced by any way, shape or form. Eastern European friends. And I'm sitting on this bus, and on the back of the bus, on the back seat, there's quite a formidable gang sitting on the back of the bus, giving me the evils as we're going into Uganda, really giving me the eye. And I'm thinking, well, this is going to be handy, because by the time we reach Mukona, it's going to be night time. You know, we've got our bags. There's 5 of them. There's 1 of us. We're dropped off, you know, Kampala. 5 of them suddenly jump you, rob your bags. You know, away they go into the night. But we're travelling in, and you know, we're stopped at different roadblocks. Soldiers come onto the bus, and when the soldiers come on, these guys on the back seat look really worried. You know, they know what it is to cross with the military in Uganda. You don't get an easy time if you fall into their hands, so they're really watching their step. And then Yasmin and Aaron are with us, and Aaron, Mum found him living in a sewer in Kampala and took him back to Kenya with her. But Aaron's quite a lad. He's quite a, you know, he's been on the rough side of the street, and he goes and talks to them, not aware that they're giving me the eye or anything, but he goes and talks to them, and he's saying, you know, how my mother has helped him, and obviously he's been in Kenya, and how he used to live and all that. So there again, their attitude suddenly changes. They're not now giving me the big evil eye and looking a threat, because they listen to what Aaron is sharing with them, all that my mum has done for him. So that situation gets resolved. When we get into Kampala, as I say, it's dark, it's a Friday night, and in Uganda they have their markets at night. So we can make our way to the marketplace, which is not far away from the bus stop, and there must be like 1,500, 2,000 people on this square. There's gangs hanging around the edge of the square. Quite a lot of eyes on me, not only because I'm the only white man on the whole square. And it just happens to be that over 300 years not far away of white rule is being overturned. And I'm standing there with 1,500, 2,000 people, and I'm thinking, well, if these people turn on their tellies now, and whites are gunning down blacks in South Africa, or helicopter gunships are going into Soweto, where does that leave me? Suddenly I will become a symbol of everything that they hate: the slavery, the oppression that, you know, the Europeans have brought to Africa, the exploitation, whatever. But I'm going to be the only white man on the whole square. And also, as I'm standing there, there's 3 Red Cross lorries, because now you're not very far from Rwanda. You'd be like from Dis to Birmingham from Rwanda. And the Red Cross lorries are rolling down to the Rwandan border. 3 Red Cross lorries go by, and I do take my hat off to the, you know, I read one story where these Red Cross workers, they could have saved themselves, but they tried to get these children out of Kigali in Rwanda, and because they delayed to try and get these children to safety and risk their own life, that cost them their life. The children and the Red Cross workers were all hacked to death. So I do take my hat off to the Red Cross, and they're often first on the scene in really war zones and difficult places. So Mum's gone off to get a taxi, you know, comes back, and the interesting thing is too, you got all the Nile perch, which is quite a big fish, and that's all sliced up on the marketplace. But no one's buying the fish, because they know the Nile perch and Lake Victoria. We'll all be feeding on the bodies coming. There's loads of bodies coming down the river. As Mum said, lots of headless bodies coming down the river into Lake Victoria, obviously, that the fish are feeding on. So no one's buying the Nile perch. And we get in a taxi, we go up to the Mykonos Children's Home that was opened by Princess Anne. And my mother was also a guest of honour because of her work with, you know, street children and orphans in Africa. And she knew the founder, Sam, very well. And it was run by Save the Children. And as we go up to the children's home, there's soldiers on the track, and they put a machine gun in the window where I am on the passenger side and want to check our papers and everything. And we get there, and Sam is so, the children's home founder, is so pleased to see us. He said, "Thank God that you've come, because they'll think that you're VIPs from Save the Children, and they're poised to take over this children's home, because the Mykonos Children's Home was in a strategic place. So the military are ready to take it over and use it as a garrison if the trouble over the elections, and with the warlords all rearing up in Uganda." And he said, you know, they'll come in here, they'll beat people, they'll rape the young girls, they'll kick everybody out. And he had already moved children down to Rakai, the most vulnerable ones, and, you know, food and supplies. He was already ahead of the game. And this is my point too. Just like Sam had already moved provisions, and he'd already moved children to safety before that weekend came. Because once the trouble begins, you can't get anywhere. You have to be always ahead, you know, forward plan, and that's what he'd done. And he too, Mum was quite oblivious to all what's going on. She's just involved with children, and her focus and mind is on the children, totally oblivious sometimes to what is going on around her, the political situation, you know, what is breaking out where and when, you know. You know, her focus is on the children, fair enough. And a lot of the children there had, the older ones, they'd seen all the violence and the cruelty and the brutality and lost their parents in the Idi Amin regime in Uganda, so they knew, they still had very bad memories from that time. And Uganda looking very like it was all going to go off again. You know, things are on edge, and they knew that any time soldiers could just roll up. So, and as I've said earlier, and as Sam also said to Mum, because that's where I got it from, Sam says, what you have to really realise, Patricia or Mama Pat, is one day can be war, in Africa, one day can be peace, and the next day can be war. So the next day we go, on the Saturday, we go into Kampala. Mum goes to see the advocate, but he hasn't got the paperwork ready. That won't be ready till the Wednesday. So we're now stuck in Uganda at the worst possible time that you really want to be in Uganda, during the elections. And I'm sitting in a cafe, and a gentleman comes in from the cafe, in this cafe, looking around. You know, he's quite well dressed, and he comes over and speaks to me, because the people he's looking for are not there. And he was a Tutsi. He was a lawyer for a big petroleum company in Rwanda. And he told me they'd been on a lovely holiday in Tanzania. And they'd come back on the Wednesday, everything was fine. They'd put their bags down, and they hadn't even unpacked their bags. Got back on the Wednesday. And then on the Thursday, all hell had broken loose. So they just grabbed a few things and fled for their life. Now his wife and 3 lovely children came in. His wife was 8 months pregnant, 3 other lovely children. And he said that they'd only just got out of Rwanda by the skin of their teeth. At the refugee crossing point into Uganda, over 2,000 people were massacred behind them, shot, hacked to death, bludgeoned. but they didn't make it out. Him, his pregnant wife and 3 lovely children made it out, and they'd just lost their big home, cars, all their money was in account in Rwanda. He had about the equivalent of £2 left on him. But he looked at me with such reality. I haven't seen that kind of reality in someone's face. He just said, I thank God so much that we're alive and we're together. He just couldn't thank God enough that they had managed to be fortunate enough. They didn't know what the fate of their friends and relatives were, who were all Tutsis. But had the Hutus caught them, you know, they would have been dead. They wouldn't have been standing in Uganda. And as I've also mentioned too, at the same time, you had people hiding in mass graves. That's how severe the situation was. To try and avoid being massacred, they were actually hiding in mass graves. Thousands of people trying to flee through the forests of Rwanda, being hunted by the military, the militia. And people were literally dancing. You saw footage of people dancing in their victims' blood, you know, with fiendish delight. It was just like evil had manifested in this place so much. And we went and visited James and Jai, who were Asian friends of my mum's. And as I lay there, you know, we had a chat with them, and I went into their spare room, just had a rest when I laid there. And as I lay there, the Spirit of God just flowed over me, almost like an electrical current, just absolutely flowed up and down me. And then I had this vision of a woman in Rwanda standing there with her children. It was just getting dusk, nightfall, which is the worst possible time, dark, and the killing was going on day and night. But at night time, you know, the terror, and just the look on this woman's face. In this vision I could see really clear in my spirit, and you know, I could just see it so clear. It just summed up everything that was taking place in Rwanda. And from out of my innermost spirit just came such a roar. If I could have been there to be between her and the people coming to kill her and her children, you know, the men coming to massacre the innocent. But this almighty roar, like I've never experienced before, just came out of my spirit. And another friend of Mum's, Abraham, which again was, you know, quite ironic, because on the Sunday we were going to a big church in Uganda, in Kampala, and I was walking to this church with Abraham, and I told him what I'd experienced, and he said in Africa, he said, that is what is known as the lion's breath. When you feel that roar of indignation against, you know, the atrocities that's being committed against the innocent, or for whatever reason that's caused that roar in your spirit, they said in Africa we call that the lion's breath. And we're walking through the streets of Kampala, and he's telling me how the lights used to dim in Kampala when they used to be pulling the bodies out, when Idi Amin's brutal regime was there. They would throw the bodies into the source of the Nile there, and even the crocodiles were so bloated. And the Israelis had built this big hydro power station, and they would have to clear the bodies out of the filters. So when the lights used to dim in Kampala, you knew that's when they were removing the bodies in the hydro plants. And you could still see the war scars in Kampala, buildings and bullet marks and so forth. And we're walking, his name is Abraham, and it just reminded me of the Old Testament, because we're walking through, you know, just before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and because of all the evil there, as Abraham had said to the Lord, you know, there's 50 righteous people here, will you spare Sodom and Gomorrah? And the Lord said, yeah. And he said, well, if there's 40, will you spare Sodom and Gomorrah? And he said, yeah. He said, what about there's 30? And the Lord said, yeah. He said, well, what about there's 20 righteous people? Will you try to intercede for Sodom and Gomorrah? He said, will you spare Sodom and Gomorrah? And there's 20 righteous people in 2 big cities. If there's just 20 righteous people, will you? The Lord said, yeah. And Abraham said, well, what about there's 10 righteous people in these 2 big cities? Will you spare these 2 cities that are full of evil and the evil intentions of men? And the Lord said, if there is 10, I will spare the 2 cities. There weren't even 10 righteous people in 2 great big cities. And then the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah comes. And I'm walking through the streets with Abraham to this big church, and he turns to me just like Abraham did to the Lord in the Old Testament, and said to him, the angel of the Lord, or the Lord, he said, is there something I should know? And I said, well, I feel in my heart, that trouble is coming to Uganda. I mean, you've got heavy fighting in North Uganda, and at the same time the RPF, which was the Tutsi force, was grouped in southern Uganda when they were going to push back into Rwanda against the Hutus. But so I really do feel that trouble is coming, so, for you in Uganda too. So anyhow, we go into this big church, and they asked me to greet the church, just to say hello, which I'm happy to do. So got up, shared with them, and again I was asked if there's anything that I felt on my heart to share with them, and I said, I do feel you got trouble coming in Uganda. And in Uganda they know only too well what trouble means. And this whole big church, there were 4 apostles, which I didn't know, 4 apostles in this church confirmed the word that trouble was coming, yes, and they would need to prepare. And then this whole church just erupted into spontaneous prayer. They don't mess about, they don't play church in Uganda, through what they've been through, when you've been in countries where they've seen the deprivation and the violence and the cruelty and so forth. But this whole church just erupted into spontaneous prayer, people crying to the Lord and really praying about the situation. So that was our part. And fortunately, in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, the man of the moment, stepped up, and there wasn't violence. It didn't erupt into civil war. I think everyone in South Africa could see the bloodbath that was happening in Rwanda and realised the same could happen in South Africa if the line was crossed. If trouble started, you'd be looking at South Africa would be looking at like with Rwanda. And I mean, I have even heard prophets prophesize that what happened in Rwanda can happen in America and will happen in America. I'm not saying I'm saying that. I have heard people say that the whole situation being stirred up between blacks and whites in America, that could lead to like a Rwandan confrontation. Always people who want to divide and conquer, set rich against poor, east against west, north against south, black against white, Christian against Muslim, Hindu, so forth. Always divide and conquer. Let them people confront each other, and then they bring forward their own sinister agenda in the background. So there's this big wave of euphoria just swept through the whole continent of Africa, that South Africa was free from the white oppression apartheid. The only place there wasn't euphoria was in Rwanda. So then, fortunately, no trouble started in Uganda. Uganda kept stable. The elections went okay. They didn't erupt as people had feared the worst. And then we got the papers from the Advocate, and we were able to return to Kenya. So and the unfortunate thing is, with the technology today, and with so many people, contractors, the Freemason agenda, the Albert Piper agenda for 3 world wars, we're all in range of that. And can happen. People, there's a post the other day about the United Nations Agenda 2030, it says, but it can happen any time. Okay, I must go because my phone is now ringing. I'll speak to you later.